Thank you, everyone, for joining this webcast today. It's a real privilege to be here and to talk to all of you about a topic that I am genuinely passionate about, because I think in my work globally with a number of industries, from engineers to politicians, what I have found is that there are just myriad influences that impact our thinking, and how we think impacts the results that we get. So it is really critical to pay attention to the barriers and the influences on our thinking, so that at the end of the day, how do we get out of our own way and achieve what we're out there to achieve? So just as an overview, here are some of the areas that I'd like to cover today. We'll be looking at identifying some styles of thinking, so you understand what those systems are in a little more depth. And following that, what are the influences on those thinking processes? I think a lot of us know that there are just some innate styles and preferences, and it's really important to take that beyond this HR development component and really understanding day to day in an organization, those influences, those innate preferences impact the results we get. So following on that, what are the behaviors that encourage quality thinking? How are we being moved to choices, to activity, and how do we control that? And ultimately, what we're looking for is flow. How do we align thinking systems, and what are the behaviors that will encourage us to do that more and better? And then finally, this is my own little hot button. I think curiosity is that pillar of a thinking culture. I just want to talk about that, what it means, and how we get there. So to start off, I wanted to go for a little warm-up with you, and that little thinking man scratching his head is actually a good representation of me when I'm thinking in my furrowed brow, so I quite like him a lot. Here's a little warm-up, and I'm just going to put up a question on the next screen. I'd like you to have a quick second to think about that question, and then I want you to go ahead and put in a response. Andrew, I'm going to go ahead and hand that over to you to facilitate that question process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca. So, HCI members, this will take us back to some of our academic days. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? So if you could enter your responses in the polling application to the right of the player, take a moment, and we should begin to see those responses coming in here shortly. And here we go. It looks like we've got some 10-cent answers, 10 cents, 10 cents. One person that said 5 cents. Give it a couple more minutes while some of these come in. And as these are coming in, I'm curious, Rebecca, is this what I would think is a trick question, or does it just require a little bit of extra thought process?
Well, there are a few things going on here with that question. It's interesting to see as we come in, we've got 10 cents, 10 cents, and as soon as you said 10 cents, we had quite a bit more 10 cents coming in, a couple of 5 cents. I'll warn you all, this is a bit of a trick question. We'll explain several elements of it as we go through. Should we go ahead and...
I like the response, I could never figure out these math problems. That's kind of where I'm with
that one, to be honest. That's normally where I shut down. Oh, it's math. Give me history any day. Okay. So shall we go ahead
I think we can move on. Yes, I think we're good.
Okay. So we have a lot of people. Did you say 10 cents? And for those of you, I saw a few out there, the correct answer is actually 5 cents. And let's look at this. So if the bat and the ball are $1.10, the bat is $1.05. The ball is 5 cents. And what's interesting with this question is that it's a very quick response we go to, and for those of us who say 10 cents, once we latch onto it, we also don't want to let go of it. So I just want to test out anyone who's out there thinking about it, thinking, well, I'm sure it's 10 cents. And then you look at it and you think, of course, that makes sense. There are a few different ways in which our brain was hijacked in that exercise, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Before we move forward, I wanted to share this quote. Thinking is the hardest work there is, which is probably the reason so few engage in it. It's the reason why things like Sudoku, brain teasers are popular, because we know that that brain is a muscle we have to flex. But just as easy as it is to forgo the gym some days, and I have to confess that was me this morning, it's really easy to back out of doing that hard work of thinking. So what's the problem with getting ourselves to think? Well, the problem starts here with the speed of light and the pace that's around us, and I'm sure everyone can resonate. We have a very high level of connectivity. We have a high expectation on us for reaction. There's a man named Daniel Kahneman, who's a social economist and recently won the Nobel Prize for his work, who has actually identified two systems of thinking in order for us to start to contextualize this a bit differently. He labels the system System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the fast, automatic, effortless system of thinking. It's like the speed of light. It has to do with our knowledge, our experience, our instincts, our innate preferences. System 1 is a great way to react, to approach a situation that we have seen before, and we've resolved it successfully. System 1 is very appropriate. If I've seen that time and again, I know how it works. Let me just get in there and get it done. With System 1, it's usually very appropriate when the issue is simple and the answer is obvious. It's straightforward. The cost of being wrong is low, and the consequences of that are perfectly acceptable to the organization. If you can go through all of those as being true, then System 1 is a great choice. It's efficient. It'll get you where you have to go. It'll get you there quickly. The challenge is when we start to get to the more effortful system, and that is System 2 thinking. System 2 is the hard work that Henry Ford is talking about. System 2 requires us to consciously think through issues in a systematic way. System 1 may be if I say what's 2 plus 2, you're going to rattle off 4 because you've known it since it was drilled into you when you were a child. System 2 is if I say what's 18 times 42, and you're going to stop. Your wheels need to turn a bit. If you're me or if you're that person who never liked those math problems, you're probably picking up a pen and starting to scribble rather than even bother trying to do it in your head. System 2 is what we need to engage when we are faced with an unfamiliar challenge, something that we haven't seen before. System 2 is required when that issue is complicated. It touches a lot of different areas of our organization. It could be a complex issue, or it could be that when we look at it, we have so much knowledge and experience in the room and different ways of approaching that we have too many options to choose from. So where do you go? How do you know that you're on the right track? And then finally with System 2, the cost of being wrong is high and the consequences are unacceptable to an organization. When all of those are true, it's an indicator that we need a different type of thinking and we need to be able to engage in that way. System 2 is required there. So I'm going to put up another question, and Andrew, I'll let you take us through this one again. If I could just frame it first in your experience, some of the reasons that people default to System 1. What I'm thinking here is, for example, I've been in a situation where we might be trying to think something through and say the CEO walks in and says, well, I think we should do this, and we'll move in that direction. So I just wanted to see what are some of the reasons that people default to System 1. Andrew?
Absolutely. Let's take a look and see what some of these that come in here. So it looks as if we've got inability to handle taking risks. System 1 requires less energy. I think that's interesting. We like those answers that we're just off the tip of our head, like, oh, I know this, right?
Yeah.
I think this answer here really speaks to your question about the baseball and bat. When they don't realize the complexity of the problem, that system 1 is like the default. And so
I think that's a great comment, and that's one that we're going to go into in a bit more depth. I think the energy piece as well. I think that how we're influenced in how we even look at something to start with. Oh, executives like to trust their gut and are praised for being decisive. Competing priorities. Great. Yeah, and I'd like to speak to some of those as we start to move through that. Time constraints, I think we hear that a lot. I think time constraints, we think it's more efficient to go into System 1, which is exactly why I titled this Slow Down so you can speed up. I think quite often in terms of that time piece, we'll think we're being efficient, and really we have to then go back and redo and redo and redo because we realize we haven't solved the real problem.
All right, so let's go to the next portion of the presentation.
So I wanted to talk about a few of those responses because I think they really are important, particularly in the, executives like to make decisions, that it's habit. I think it's really important to flag that our psychology and our experience has really been hijacked by how we've been raised, particularly in Western culture. We have been rewarded and promoted through our careers for being seen to be expert, for having the right answer. I mean, think back to school, who could raise their hand first? We haven't embedded in our culture and our systems in terms of our values that importance of taking time. And I think there's been this whole movement to say, I need to be seen to be right, and I need to be seen to be right first. And there's a huge identity that's caught up with that. There's a huge satisfaction. So I think that's important to pay attention to. So let's talk about, I think there are some of those cultural influences, and there's a lot going on, and that's a piece I want to talk about. I am passionate about influence as a topic because I think it's really critical to organizations to understand how they're being moved and how their collective consciousness is getting them the results or not getting the results based on influences around them. So I started with this image because for me, the Latin root of influence is to flow. And I think when we're looking for processes, when we're looking for communication, when we're looking for quality outputs, we're looking at that fluidity. And the reality is, to me, influence is like water. I used to live in England in the Southwest, and it was a real privilege to be there. And one of my favorite things to do on a summer day was to sit by the Avon River, and you could toss a leaf onto the water, and you could sit and watch it for the span of an afternoon, and then you would eventually realize it wasn't there anymore as it had slowly moved downstream. There is some influence that is so subtle, we don't even realize that it's happening around us. And then suddenly we've been moved to a different place, and we're not even sure how we got there. In other cases, influence is so powerful, it's like a tsunami, and there's no way to ignore it, and it is washing over us, it is pushing us, it is moving us. We don't want to be in it, we want to get out of it, but we know that it's going on. So we'll talk about what some of those things are, and what I'd like to give you are 5 sort of typical influences that create those errors in thinking, and this is based on Kahneman's research. One of the first things that Kahneman identified, and I've actually used a lot in my work with leadership and behavioral development, is the halo effect, which is if I like some of the parts, then I'm going to like the whole thing. Now with the halo effect, I find there's also, I always call it the halo in horns, because I think we find if I like something and resonate it or a person, I may go with their ideas. I may just say, hey, that's great, take it, run with it, without doing that quality thinking. Or if I don't like something and I typically don't experience that as something of value to me, I may ignore it outright. It's embarrassing to say, and it's also a reality. So paying attention to, wait a minute, am I being biased just by my preferences? Because I like a bit of what I'm seeing, so I'm going to engage in the whole thing. Another effect, Kahneman labels as what you see is all there is. And I think this is a great example of, can you see the forest for the trees? Or do we get into a situation, and I think particularly in organizations now, these complex issues, and some people put those up as their answers, that complexity. We don't realize how complex it is when we can only see our part. And how do we start mapping and understanding all of the dependencies, all of the different trees around us that are going to be impacted? So what may seem to us as a small, hey, I'm just going to, flick this twig off this tree, I could be impacting the entire forest around me. So really understanding how much thinking am I doing about the complexity before I jump to the solution. Another effect on our thinking, where our thinking gets hijacked, is the framing effect. And I'm going to give you an example of this. How information is stated can be viewed favorably or unfavorably, or I can influence how you're going to think. Go back to that bat and ball question, and I just want you to think for a second about how I framed that. And I'm just gonna check my notes really quick, because I think what I said was, I'm just going to put up a quick question, and I want you to have, fast think about it. Just put up your answers. Andrew, go ahead and run them through this. My language also influenced you to not use your best thinking. Why? Because it makes it less fun when we put up all the 10-cent answers. But understanding that I framed you not to think. How many times does that happen in an organization where we actually say, hey, we need to get a quick solution to this, we need to move to it. We're not thinking, hey, I want you to really delve into the complexity, but can you resist that framing and still engage in thinking? It's a question for you and for your organizations, I would say. The next effect that Kahneman called out was what he called the anchoring effect, which is we can be strongly influenced by numbers and facts not really relevant to the issue. Another way that works is also the anchoring effect. One of the first things we saw was several people putting up 10 cents. Once that came up, many more 10-cent answers came in. I think, Andrew, we both noticed that. It was interesting. We have 10 cents, 5 cents, but as soon as there were several 10 cents coming up, those come where we get anchored to what's that first thing we hear. It may or may not be relevant. And again, how do we start to delve deeper, and what's our process that we go through to think differently? And then finally, I love this image in the first place because I think that it's how I feel in a number of problems. Suddenly lightning strikes, there's a huge impact, and we recall in this availability bias effect, we are recalling only those impactful, unusual occurrences. So we resist accessing all of our memories, and what we're going to do is think of that one time when that one thing happened this way and jump to it. I think this happens a lot when you're in the problem-solving environment, where we think, oh, we had this problem last year, I remember this. Well, that may not be the real thing, but the impact feels the same. The experience feels the same, and so we latch onto it, and we take our thinking back to that place. And that's what's happening in availability bias. I'd like to take it back over to you. Andrew, would you like to take them through this next question to get a sense of what are some things that happen in their organizations?
Certainly, Rebecca. So HCI members, we've got another poll question. And this one is, when faced with new issues, those that no one has ever seen before, how do you get those resolved? So your options are senior leadership gets involved and makes the final decision. We have a standard, clear process that we engage in. A team gets together and hammers it out. Or hard to describe because magic happens. So that's a good I like that option. I think as we've getting some of these, I mean, I've had some magic happen, and it's always like I don't know how that happened, but it did, and I'm glad it did. But I think that that's not something that you can bank on predictably. So I hope that that's not the most popular option today on our call. But
exactly.
So here our results are coming in, Rebecca, and it looks like a lot of collaboration and teamwork gets things done. And I think that's true in my experience for sure. That's how you solve the unknown problems. So it looks like most of the folks on our call, almost 60%. Have chosen that option. So I just would like to get some of your feedback on that, Rebecca.
Yeah, that's interesting information to me. And I think that is what I've seen the most. I'm seeing that number for senior leadership creep up as well. Senior leadership gets involved and makes the final decision, which have some interesting cultural indicators, don't they? But I think this bit about the team getting together and hammering it out is really interesting when I couple that with, do you have a standard, clear process that you engage in? Because what that's telling me is we're getting a lot of people together, which means we're getting a lot of people with some very different ways of thinking. And they might sort of bash some heads around, put some ideas together. And I think my question there would be, when they're getting together, how are they hammering it out? What steps are they taking? How do they make sure that they're responding to the right data and the right information? And I think it's interesting because what I encounter quite a lot of the time is you get the best and the brightest, and at the same time, the output isn't always what should be the sum of all of those parts. So how are you ensuring that you're getting the most of the brain power in the room? And I think that requires having some sort of standard, clear process to go through. So that would be what I'm wondering about those responses and the way they bounced back with each other. That takes me to where I'd like to go about what are the behaviors, what are the things that we need to be aware of in order to promote a thinking organization. I love this. The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. And I think it's so often that, again, this goes back to our identity, where we like to present our own point of view, and we feel like that is the way that we're filling people's collective intelligence. I mean, even look at this format. It's great to have some questions, but we're really set up to say present information, and I'm going to put this forward. But really, at the end of the day, how do I keep you thinking and keep you building and linking ideas? And collectively together, then where do we get? I think there are some things we need to be aware of in our cultures and our organizations. The first thing is, in all of this work, it starts with a positive mindset. And for me, I use the work of transactional analysis. I'm really a strong believer in TA in organizations. And I think that positive mindset is understanding that it's two things. It's my point of view, my belief about my rights and responsibilities. And secondly, it's my point of view and my belief about your rights and responsibilities. This isn't about you giving me permission. This is about me walking into a room genuinely thinking, even if every encounter I've had with this person before has been difficult or challenging, I still need to understand that that point of view is worth me taking in. So I'd like to think about this in terms of energy, and I started there when I put up the bits of influence and the water, because I think that one of the most important things for an organization to understand is what's that energy that we're engaging in and how are we using it. And to simplify it, I think there is push energy, which is what happens when we're constrained by time, when we just like to go forward and get things done, get that satisfaction out of ticking that box. And then there is pull energy, which is really about kindling that fire. How am I drawing things out? How am I exploring? How am I taking that time with my magnifying glass as a detective to fully understand the scope of what I'm looking at? both of those are incredibly appropriate. Just as System 1 and System 2 have their time and their place, both of those energies are important to an organization. How are they characterized? Well, push energy, again, this is really much more focused on my agenda and what's important to me and what am I trying to get across. It's characterized by some direct statements. In its most aggressive place, just before getting to the point where I could be crossing that line, this is a lot of, this is what I want, this is what I need. I am going to be very clear about what's important to me, my rights and my responsibilities, and I'll be putting those forward. I'll still be doing it positively. All of this assumes positive mindset. It's going to be a much stronger, more of that forceful tsunami-like energy. You'll know when I'm in the room, when I'm in push and using direct statements. And then treating this like a dial, just up from that, still push energy, is when I say, I have a thought about this. My view is that we need to do X. The reasons might be 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to use some logic. I'm going to do some proposing. This isn't as strong of a push energy, yet it is still focused on my agenda. Now, working through the dial, we want to explore what are the behaviors on pulling out someone else's agenda. So this is now where, in terms of that positive mindset, I'm going to spend much more time exploring yours. And just after logic and proposals is going to be some curious inquiry, characterized by some open questions, that exploration, trying to understand what's going on. And then furthest over, the most meadow-like summer brook, leaf on the water day, is that authentic listening, where really it's just unfiltered, complete drawing out of someone else's agenda. Now, just as with push, too much of those direct statements will feel really forceful and in your face, too much of the pull is going to be an energy that starts to demotivate. It will feel very passive. Often it feels like you're just on the therapist's couch, and what are we really here for? Let's move over and get something done. So my belief is that our real power and how we can really influence thinking in our organization is when we treat this as a dial, and we are constantly building and linking between curious inquiry and logic and proposals. I might hear something and say, that's a risk, I can't ignore it. I'm going to inject a direct statement, and then I'm going to check over and find out what else is on your agenda, what's going on. So let's think of these in terms of getting out of our own way in organizations. For me, there are a few things that characterize positive push statements. And for me, at the heart of that, again, going back to the rights and responsibilities, I'm going to own my point of view as my own. So my language will be, I want, I need, my requirements for this are, I'm thinking, I have an idea in my view. So I am not going to be presenting my point of view as universal truth. And when some of these push statements really start to stop thinking is when the language comes out as you should, what you need to do, okay, well, you have to start here. The best way forward is, or the most important or critical thing. Now, when you can contextualize that with, from what I've seen, the most important thing is this, it tends to have a much more collaborative point of view. So those are just some flags around push and pull that I've seen in my time. So let's go over to the pull. With curious inquiry, this is about open questions where the intention is to explore, to understand. And I think of this as, are we seeking to connect all of the dots? So I want you to just think about curiosity in your own organizations. And Andrew, I'll turn this question over to you and just flag that I love Curious George, and I think he would be my mascot if he could be. Well, my name is Rebecca George, so I guess that makes sense. Sorry, Andrew, over to you.
All right. I didn't put that together until you just mentioned that. But HCI members, if we could get you to weigh in on what are some of the barriers to curiosity that you encounter. So if you could type those into the final into the polling option there. We're getting some, bosses want quick answers. Of course, a fear of being wrong. Organizations punishing uncomfortable questions and risk-taking. I think that's very telling. Fear is a big driver of that. I'm thinking perhaps overcomplication, like too hierarchical bureaucracy type of thing. That might inhibit curiosity. That's just sort of off the top of my head. But as we're getting some of these responses, Rebecca, maybe you can weigh in.
Yeah, and I think this that lack of time to explore unless there's a short-term gain, and again, I think that goes to balancing. What is gain in truth? Because I think quite often we'll go for the short term, but then we'll sacrifice the long term. I think that's exactly why we ended up in the recession as we did. Lack of transparency in the organization, lack of passion for the topic. Yeah, there are a lot of. This is interesting because we're getting a lot of very different responses. And I love this one because I think this links to what we've heard a few times in terms of risk. I work in a highly regulated field. I tend to be curious and creative and often am cautioned to think legal and regulatory first, and then only then consider a creative solution derived from curious thinking. And that's interesting to me because I also think that it's important to have processes in place that allow you to use that curiosity in order to manage risk. Sometimes the best risk management is done through creative thinking, that ability to say, what else could be out there? Let's just take it to the extreme. And then if we need to pull it back, we can. We know that we can monitor the likelihood or the impact of this. But it's funny because my view on risk management is that you've got to get curious and creative if you're going to do it properly. Because if you only go with what you can see in front of you, going back to that what you see is all there is, 9 times out of 10 would suggest you'll probably miss something big. It's interesting, this one just popped up, leaders are not comfortable with innovative ideas of new generation. And I think this, to me, really goes back to that positive mindset piece. And I think the ability to build that first comes from, that's an emotional intelligence place. I think that comes from feedback, from acknowledgement, but really talking about how important is your strategy to you? What is the legacy you want to leave? And I think there's some interesting points that come up in there. Thank you all for sharing those. Now, I'd like to take you on the back of those responses through an exercise around authentic listening. And what we're going to do for this is I'm going to put up some statements and actually just talk you through them. This, again, starts to feel, remember, authentic listening, too much of this, and you'll feel like you're on the therapist's couch, so I'm aware of that. The tone of this will take you more of that introspective, reflective place, just to set that up for you. What I would like you to do is think of an issue that you are having. So HCI members, if you could think of an issue, if it's a work issue, family issue, doesn't matter. It's private to you. Just put that in the front of your mind. And what I'm going to do is make some statements just to draw out some depth of your knowledge and experience around that situation to get you to think about it maybe in a little different way. So going to that challenge, tell me more. In what way? What's that like? Compared to what? And the greatest gold mine of statements and exploring thinking. What else? What else? What else? And then? So that's an example of where curiosity can take you in its purest form, which is complete, unfiltered, free-flow statements. My intention is simply to draw out greater depth. Now, going back to some of the responses we saw about time, just get it done, the complexity, we don't see how complex it is. For those of you who understand Myers-Briggs, I am your classic J preference. I love to just check that box, move on to the next thing, and get something done. And I have found the greatest value in my career coming from someone just taught me once when I was going through my coaching credentialing, just say what else at least 3 times before you move on. And what I have found in my work, particularly with organizations that find greater complexity, I've done a lot of work with Airbus, EADS, working with their engineers. Usually it takes until the third what else to get a real answer. And it comes from the default being that system 1, and I know I can get through this quickly and move on. By the time I get to the third what else when I'm questioning someone, they usually start to realize there's a greater expectation of the depth of thinking that is required. So that's why I say that's one of those gold mine statements, to just say, my job is to just keep exploring. I want to build the breadth and the depth, and my intent is to really understand, not only from me, but to help you to understand more powerfully as well. Those negative pull behaviors, they filter or they advise as the underlying intent. I had a hilarious experience just last week on the airplane where I was a bit tired, so I just resorted to eavesdropping, which is always fun. And clearly there were 2 professionals traveling together, and this man was very frustrated about something. And the woman sitting next to him said, well, let me just ask you a few questions to really help open up your thinking about this. Do you really think that's the best person for you to be talking to? Do you think that person has their best interest? What are you going to do about this? And she started going to some what questions, but they were very clearly about what I think you should do, my agenda. And it was interesting because she kept going back every 30 seconds to, I'm just trying to help you think this through. But really important to, and I wonder how many of you have heard that how many times. But we all know when someone is actually just giving us advice dressed up as a question. The worst thing you can do in poll is ask a question when you really just have a statement to make. If you just have something to say it. If you're genuinely curious, get curious. But being very aware of the impact on other people's thinking based on your underlying intent. Because at the end of the day, what this is about, again, going right back to the beginning, is my job is to keep your wheels turning. If I'm managing a team, if I'm leading people, I'm only as effective as the utilization of the knowledge I have around me. So how do I keep your wheels turning? And I'll share this quote from Voltaire. Judge a man by his questions rather than by his answers. So just to summarize in terms of what are some of those traits of quality thinking organizations and leadership, at Kepner-Tregoe, there's a lot of work that's been done looking into this specifically. We're quite passionate about thinking organizations, as I'm sure you can tell. The number one thing that we identified in over 50 years is that in thinking organizations, they know you don't have to have all of the answers. You do have to have the right questions. Following on to that, you need to have a systematic approach, a common language, and it's really important to keep thinking visible, just as we've gone through a presentation today, and you can see those key points up here, keeping everyone in alignment and on the same page. When that happens, teams can communicate effectively across functions, across time zones, across regions. Critical problems are solved with both speed and accuracy. And I think most importantly, going to this, all employees know how and when to use System 2 thinking and how much of it, and they know when to rely on System 1. Because really, at the end of the day, we're looking for those quality results that link to both strategic and organizational direction. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you all so much for engaging in this and for your answers, which have been very thought-provoking for me as well. And just curious now, are there any questions for me? And Andrew, I'll let you facilitate this part now.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I would just like to thank you for providing this really fascinating look at critical thinking and business outcomes. And this is such an important concept for achieving success in business, but also just achieving success in life and relationships. And so I know that everyone on the call really got a lot out of this presentation, and I want to thank you for that. But
thank you so much. What a pleasure.
You know, I think when we go through some of these questions, one of the things that struck me, and I think some of our comments in the chat function kind of echoed this, when we talked about how framing questions can result in that sort of automatic system one response. That seemed to really ring true for a lot of our members. And I'm just curious if there is a way in which, as sort of posers of questions or solicitors of results, if there's a way to frame a question in a way that perhaps does the opposite and elicits more of a system two thinking response.
Yeah, I think, you know, first of all, it's as much as doing the same thing, being aware of if I'm saying, oh, you know, I just want a quick answer to this, thinking to yourself, what's the level of thinking that I want, and frame that. So I'd like you to take some time to tell me what your thoughts are on the complexity. So first frame, I need to understand more about the complexity. And I'd like you to take some time to think about this. So just as we say, go quite quickly or time's fast, we need to have a solution, I think, you know, being able to frame that just in the reverse. The other thing that I'm more aware of in framing, though, Andrew, I think is I know I need to pay attention to when I'm being told to be quick about something. And going back to thinking about my rights and responsibilities, my positive mindset allows me to say, what I heard is that you want me to think through this really quickly. I'm wondering if there's a bit more thinking that is required. I'd like to take some time to do that. Is that okay? So really just framing back what I heard that this is quick. I'm wondering if it's more. I'd like to take more time. What do you think? And that goes right back to that difference of energy as well. So I'm going to push my agenda a little bit, which is I want some time. I want to think. And then I'm going to check in because this is what I heard. Is that true? Can I check that out? Is that all right? And then from there, I know. And then from there, the people around me have made a decision about the quality of thinking they want to engage in.
Excellent. Thank you. I think another good question is coming in from someone on the chat, and that's asking if you have any specific advice when we're trying to align communication across generations. And the specific example is perhaps when your boss is significantly younger or older.
I think that is such a challenge now in organizations. In terms of specific advice, something that I really like and I think is important in that alignment piece, for those of you if you're familiar with appreciative inquiry, and the first step of that is talking about where you want to go. And so that alignment is, first of all, let's get everyone on the same page of what's our vision. And then I think it's important to do a bit of, okay, so if that's where we want to go, what are the barriers? But as we're working through those barriers, this is where appreciative inquiry comes in. I think it's really important for both of those people to have the chance to say what's important for them to preserve in any way forward. So I may say, yeah, I want to get there, but I feel like that this part of the way I work isn't being valued or taken forward. I need to have the opportunity to express that and talk about the best of what has been in the way that I've worked and the best of what has been about the way someone else has worked. How do we take those together and contract that we will work to preserve that in whatever way we move forward? I think is a really helpful approach.
Great, thanks. Another question that we've got is, what suggestions would you share for stimulating curiosity within an organization?
Oh, I'll tell you, I think there are a lot of things in terms of stimulating curiosity. I'll share one that's a little bit out of the box, and this goes more to my creative background, but a lot of organizations now are working on some of the basic principles of improvisation. And in terms of the leadership development function, they'll bring in training around improv capability and stimulating that curiosity by playing with it a bit and saying, the experience of being able to say, as crazy as this is, yes, and. So that would be on the farthest side of something that's quite fun. I think on the more serious side, in terms of stimulating that, giving people the chance to engage in some difficult problem solving that is outside of their typical remit. So take them away from what they've seen before, get them involved in the opportunity to look at problems in some different functions, some different areas, and work through those collectively as a team and see how they're doing and start to scorecard themselves. Because I think curiosity is also bred by when we start to do something and we realize we don't have all the answers, and then we start to wonder more and we want to find a different way forward. So I think there are some fun, different, sort of activity, team building things you can do, and then I think there are some more serious quality output. Let's see how we problem solve. Try some different approaches, try some structures, and take that forward.
Great answer. So another question is another type of a case study question, and this is about if you had any examples that you might be able to share where a company strategically used System 2 thinking to solve a particular business issue, and then perhaps a little bit of detail around the positive results that were obtained.
Where they strategically used System 2 thinking? I think there are a number of organizations. One that we've worked quite extensively is JCI Controls. And what they have done is they have embedded critical thinking into their core curriculum and their core development. They use actually a combination of Six Sigma, Lean, and Kepner-Tregoe's tools, and they apply it to their risk management. They apply it to all of their projects. And what's interesting is what they have told us is that's become a strategic initiative that comes from the top of their operations, the way they look at things. And they actually recently fed back to us that by working in this way, they said that there's by applying critical thinking as a capability that's embedded in their organization, they are recognizing savings of about $26,000 per person per project they touch once they've been trained in this way, which is pretty impressive. But clearly they've actually gone to a very robust direction to embed critical thinking, and they've even applied a very robust model of ROI evaluation to see how that's working. Interestingly, the head of operations for them was speaking to us recently about a woman who had solved a complex problem, and apparently it was something that's usually out of her remit, and it was broadcast so much in the community that she went in to do her grocery shopping, and someone said, "Oh, I heard you saved the company X million dollars solving that problem." So it's interesting to see when it is a part of a strategic initiative, what incredible morale and motivation also comes out of it as well. So that's probably one of the most recent success stories I've heard, was the woman doing her shopping, linked to the strategic initiative being complimented at the store. So
that's great, and I think it definitely shows how through making a conscious effort, like this transformative impact it has on an organizational culture. And I think one of the things that struck me, one of our polling questions was, or one of the responses was about fear, fear of failure. And so I'm just curious what you have to say about folks that may be on this call where perhaps they're in a situation where there are some significant organizational barriers, and so they're confronted with perhaps a fear of speaking up or a fear of doing things differently. What can we do as individuals to kind of combat that?
Yeah, I may be a little bit controversial in how I address that, because and let me just start by saying I think that fear is very valid, and we all know where that comes from. And those of us who are in those situations, it is very real. I would also like to go back to some of the things I talked about at the beginning, which is that halo and horns, that framing effect. Lots of times the fear is based on our own experiences, those own impactful experiences. And I think it's a step to that positive mindset is about being able to acknowledge the fear in the places where you're experiencing it. I can never guarantee the outcome beyond that, but I'll share with you an experience that I had where I worked with someone who was a mile of a minute, and I would say borderline abusive boss relationship, and this was fairly early in my career, and I started exploring this concept of that belief in my rights and responsibilities, and also being able to still wonder about this person's. And I started thinking about it and realized that as much as I was afraid of this person who was very difficult and dynamic and would berate me, I also realized that he was the most senior person in the organization. He had pressures and financials that he was responsible for, and any number of things that were really weighing on his performance. And the fact that I was afraid around him was only giving him more power. And when I finally walked in and I said, I'd like to sit down and talk because I feel like you're frustrated with me, and I'm feeling like this is a difficult situation. And I think we need to work more effectively together. How do we do that? Now, I would love to tell you the fairy tale ending was he said, oh, that's a great idea. I am feeling that way. He actually was so not used to someone talking to him in that way that he actually stormed out of his own office. It was the most bizarre thing you've ever seen. He also then didn't speak to me for a week. And I think he just didn't know what to do with the fact that I'd been challenged. But I tell this story because after about a week and a weekend went by, we started to have different conversations. By the time a year went by, he was actually my favorite person in the organization to work with because we'd got to such a collaborative place. But I had to reprogram that tone that had been framed. I think the people around him had got so used to the way that he influenced by that mile a minute. And so my challenge is, can you step into that fear to try to work to something better? It's stepping into the unknown. It's the ability to still stay curious and ask those questions. And in doing it, I think you have to acknowledge and frame what that experience is that you're pushing against. Like I said, it may be a bit controversial because that can be really hard for people to do. I realize that. I think it's very important to build that as a skill.
Great story. I had a lot of a visual there of somebody storming out of their own office. I can see that.
It was bizarre.
It's one of those head scratching moments, kind of like that first slide you showed of the person furrowing their brow.
Yes, that was me for a week. What?
So I think we've got time for one last question, and I think it kind of is a little bit of a piggyback off of the last one, whereas we talked a little bit about individuals confronting fear of change. So how do we do this on a larger scale? I mean, clearly in your example, it was about reset, hitting the reset button, and kind of creating a level of transparency so that everyone was on the same page. Is that how you can appropriately change the culture of an organization?
I think that's it. I think it's an important part of it. I think that, and I'll tell you, actually, the way that we work through this with organizations is to look at sort of four key elements. And the first thing is that leadership alignment piece. And I imagine everyone on this call understands the importance of, if you genuinely want to move a culture in a different direction, you've got to get leadership aligned, first of all, in understanding what those gaps are to the results that they're not getting, and getting everyone in alignment about the direction that they want to go. And that is not an easy task. I think that is an integral part of the puzzle. The next piece is, I think, is you just have to say, do we have the skills? So this goes back to, do we just hammer something out in a room, or do we have a process that we can describe and go through that's repeatable, that's scalable, and that we can link to? Can we can we build the skills, build that process, and then the other important piece, again, particularly from a human capital point of view, is what are the goals and metrics? How are we managing that? So often we look at the outputs and we say, we're going to measure to, time to resolution. We're going to measure to, dollar cost. Do we actually measure and value use of process as a metric as well? And how do we do that? And I think that's an incredibly important component. Do we start to measure, the types of questions asked? Or are we just measuring that result? And I think this goes back to what I said. Our mind has been hijacked by saying the output is the most important thing. Sometimes the quality of thinking is the most important thing. And how do we align that? And then finally, what are the other measures that have to exist in terms of that sustainability? And can we just make it stick? And I think that alignment, those metrics, that the skills, the capability, and then continuing to onboard those, continuing to build those, continuing to repeat them, to value them within the organization, those are those four components that really help you to make something stick.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. This has been a great presentation. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer some of our questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time today, but I encourage everyone to feel free to take a look at some of the links down at the bottom of the page right now. In particular, the first one is called Developing a Thinking Organization. I've also chatted that link out into the chat box. So if you wanted to take some supplemental reading about this topic, that's a great place to start. I'd also like to mention that the topic will be part of a follow-up podcast that we will be recording at some point. So keep your eyes peeled on hci.org for that coming up. But I'd like to extend one more thank you to our guest, Rebecca George, and of course to Kepner-Tregoe for making this webcast possible. But I'd be remiss if I didn't extend the biggest thank you of all to each and every one of our HCI members. I really enjoy moderating these webcasts, and I appreciate that you've taken the time out of the day today to spend with us, and I definitely look forward to seeing you on another webcast soon. Enjoy the remainder of your day, everyone, and have a good one.